We are chatting with David McGuire. He is the director at Stable and Adelicious. These are two separate podcasting companies. One is for podcast production, one is for advertising. And the reason why we're chatting with him today is because of a platform called Podcross, which he just indicated he started a while ago, but he just started to bring it back more recently, and we'll dive into it, what it does and why it's something that you should be paying attention to. David, thank you for joining me here today.
That's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So before we get to Podcross specifically, what was your entryway into the podcasting space originally?
Yeah, so I used to work in radio, the BBC, lots of radio stations over here. I was a producer and an editor. And then around about 2014, I decided to go freelance. And part of the freelance landscape in London at the time was podcasting. And it was still quite nascent. A lot of people didn't really understand what it was, but I started as an advisor because I dabbled in my own podcast at the time. And then really I did less and less radio and more podcasting. So I then took a podcasting production role and advisory role at News UK, which is lots of brands over here like the Times newspaper, the Wireless Group, and TFS. And then I went over to the Telegraph Group and I did the same over there. I wrote the strategy for their podcasting at the time because they built a studio, but they didn't really know how to get into podcasting. And then from there, I set up one of my companies, Stable, because around about 2016, 17, the market was just about mature enough to start making money. Can you believe it, in podcasting? Unheard of at the time. So sponsorship was becoming a thing. We'd just come out of a period where the only way you could really make money in the UK anyway were these vanity links. And I remember the first time I did something like that, I think it was with Audible. You'd get £10 every time somebody went to audible.co.uk or whatever / the name of the podcast. And there was no CPMs, there was none of that. So Stable was born out of a desire to do quality production in podcasting and hopefully make a business out of that. And then from there, myself and my co-founder for Adelicious, we shared an office and we needed a company that took podcasting advertising more seriously. And that's blossomed from there. So that's it. That's the history of my podcasting career in a nutshell. And at the moment, I'm still there.
It is amazing how similar our paths are because I worked in radio. I started freelance podcasting. We got laid off at the end of 2014. So then I started to do freelance podcasting work in 2015. And it was around 2016 that I was 2017, when I said, you know what, I'm done with all the part-time work. I'm going to do this production stuff full time. And even a year or so later, I started doing some work at podcast advertising. So a lot of parallels there between the two of us.
Yeah, it's solid. What's the word? Solidarity. Kind of taking a leap just before the big guys, swooped in to acquire everything. So it's nice to hear that I wasn't the only one.
We're like professional doppelgangers here with our career paths,
and we're even wearing a similar color top. So there you go.
Oh my God, that's so true. Watch it on YouTube if you're not doing that so you can see. So when you started to do the ad thing and you said you were taking it more seriously, what does that mean, right? What was it about ads that you needed to form the second company? What were you diving into? What were you prioritizing?
So that's a good question. So in the UK, we're slightly behind the curve, right, when it comes to the trends and the maturity of the market. So we looked over in the US and there were lots of big independent podcast companies that were doing big deals for premium shows. In the UK, you had a little bit of that, but it was the market, and still is to a certain extent, dominated by Acast, Audio Boom, a company called Dax, which is owned by Global Media. But they really dealt with everything, and so they only really sold premium sponsorships for their premium top 5% of shows. And if you weren't in that top 5%, you kind of got left behind and you weren't really catered to. So we needed a bespoke podcast only advertising agency that didn't really deal with technology, didn't really kind of accept everyone and everyone, And at the time, Megaphone hadn't even set foot into Europe. So we were one of the first networks to use Megaphone as a open platform for our shows, which meant that we could also program in the back end of sponsorship deals. Because Acast at the time anyway, you didn't have access. There was no transparency to the deal. So even if you did a deal yourself as an independent producer, you had to give a percentage away to Acast because they programmed the deal. Whereas Adelicious, philosophy is podcaster first, which means that if a podcaster does a deal, they get 100% revenue because they can program in the advertising, they can do everything. We give them full transparency in all the rates. We try, because we don't accept everyone, we try and only grow as we grow, so we can take care of everyone on our network, and we can give them time and communication and everything you want as a podcast producer. So, we felt that as podcasting was becoming more of a mainstream media, there was a bigger need for a more bespoke, more premium curated podcast advertising network in the UK. Because basically we just looked at the States and saw what was happening there, and we just thought, well, it's going to follow. And it's still the case for today, really.
How many downloads per show were you working with at the time? Because I know here you would hear from companies say, Midroll, for example, which was a big one that was early into the game as a advertising agency, right? They won't talk to you for less than 50,000 downloads, let's say, per episode. But we had plenty of folks and plenty of clients, and I knew lots of podcasters who could generate great revenue with as little as 1,000 downloads per episode. So I'm just curious what your kind of model looked like.
Yeah, we were lucky because even though we started off with a handful of shows, we were collectively as a network, around about 1 million. So we started off with quite a nice size network, but that was collective. We still had shows that were underneath 50,000 per month, for example, and we still deal with that size occasionally because it's all market dependent, right? We can only make it work if the demand is out there from the brands. So it was tough because myself and Pascal, the co-founder at Adelicious, we've got no background when it comes to advertising, and essentially we lived and died by our numbers and our reputation in the market. And we got to a point where we had to kind of keep on reinvesting programmatic money into our direct sales team, and from there we just kind of betted on the higher CPMs, the more direct money coming in, and then over time that's worked out to the advantage as the programmatic landscape's changed. Megaphone obviously got bought by Spotify. That's become a completely different landscape, the different view of how money's made in the industry. So yeah, a lot's changed, but a lot remains the same.
You said it was about 4 years ago when you first started this Podcross platform. And for folks who are wondering, Podcross is the idea is a platform where you can go on there and bid on ad spots in podcasts to put your own promotional message. Ideally, it would be for other podcasters to promote their show on somebody else's feed. So what was the onus for starting that, and what happened to it? Why was it kind of shelved for a few years there?
Yeah. So, I mean, the great thing about working in podcasting, which I'm sure yourself, Matt, is you can attest to, is that it's one of those industries that seems to always be innovative, changing. If you think of something, you can kind of really make a difference in the landscape and how people perceive podcasting and how people operate within it. But at the time, I just needed this. So this is pre-Adelicious. I just needed a platform to promote my new podcasts on, and really, cross-promotion was the thing. And so it just involved me emailing people, getting emails from RSS feeds, and saying, "Hey, I'm making this show. You've got an audience that I want, and can I put a trailer on your show, please?" And it was a bit of trial and error. It was quite old school. And so when it first started, it was just about creating a list, much like Tink Media have done today, where you can go in, you can search for similar shows with the audience you want, and you can approach them because it might give you an email address. It's a very basic Google sheet, basically. But I sat on the URL, I kept it going. I was like, my other projects took off, the ones that actually paid the mortgage, etc. But I sat on it because I still thought there was a need in podcasting for this kind of open system where people can have access to. And when anyone talks about marketing within podcasting, there's still a big question mark. There's like, what's the best way of discovery? People disagree sometimes. They're like, well, there's Apple Podcasts, there's Spotify, there's certain ways of doing things, there's different ways of marketing things. But from what I've read, Pod News, etc., still the best way to promote your podcast is on other podcasts. And so recently I just returned to the idea on paper, and I thought, well, how could this be continue as an ecosystem, but how can I make it more relevant to today with podcasting being a bigger business than it was 4 years ago? And I just came up with this idea of having like an eBay auction for shows that want to sell inventory, want to sell spots, particularly for promoting other shows, because it happens anyway. People pay large CPMs for shows. The Sony Musics, the Wanderers, they do it all the time across different networks. And I wanted to do it in a way where you could bid for it, because I wanted to have some fluidity there. I wanted to have some, I wanted the price that people paid for these spots to be dictated by the demand for their audience. From that idea, I'm not a developer. I just, scrape together some templates, and what you see now at podcross.co is this beginning of that, really, a marketplace where podcasts of a certain audience can sell spots, and people who want to grow their audience for certain shows can buy and bid on certain shows to grow their audience.
Let's say I am the podcaster on your platform, right? People are bidding. They want to put their promo on my show, right? The auction ends. What happens as me, the podcaster, producing the show? How long do I have to get it out there? What's the tracking like? What's the accountability, I guess?
Yeah, so it's I'm still the gatekeeper of all of that. So money won't exchange unless everything's been agreed on. And I can't emphasize enough, this is not a finished product. This is an MVP type of situation where it's still going to be hand cranked. I'm still going to make sure that everyone's happy before any money is exchanged. But from what I've learned from advertising is that you can automate some aspects of this kind of stuff, but a lot of it still has to be human. It still has to have elements of nuance, right? Hopefully over time I can automate a lot of it, in terms of kind of the flight of these campaigns, the success rate in terms of conversion rates, that kind of thing. But, in terms of, who wins the auctions, I want there to be a first denial, because it might be a show that, if you have a podcast and you put it on Podcross and you do a show, I don't know, let's say it's a political show, because that's easier to talk about in terms of division. If you do a political show about the Republicans, I'm not suggesting you're a Republican or a Democrat.
Right. Doesn't matter which side. People don't want to host a lot of political content.
Yeah, that's just an example. But if a Democrat-based show then wins the bid on your show, you might not want it to be on there, right? Because of obvious reasons. So I need to ensure that there is still that human gatekeeper for what's allowed and what's accepted. So really, you'll just get an email saying, congratulations, you've won the bid. This is the price. And you won't have to, and the person will I'll talk to you. The person will pay, will pay me, and I'll then pay you once the details are scrapped, are kind of thought through. As you can tell, it's not a slick operation at this point, but I just need to ensure that it has traction before I invest more money in developing it. But I think there is something there. I definitely think there is a need in the industry to have an open platform for, doesn't matter who you're hosting on, that you can then go into a database and book something without worrying about being hosted on Megaphone or Captivate or whatever.
And you're still using Megaphone for this project, or have you shifted to a different platform?
No, it's completely independent. I've just the developer. There's nothing. There's no.
But I mean, like the podcasts themselves that these ads are going to go into, are those dynamically inserted via Megaphone? Are you using a different platform? Are you guys just baking them into the audio itself?
It depends on whoever puts the show on the platform. It depends on their platform how that's then incorporated into the show. So I can't emphasize how hand cranked this is. So if you're on a hosting platform that doesn't allow dynamic insertion, I can't think of any that don't. It would have to be baked in for a certain amount. But if it's on Megaphone, if it's on whoever, Art19, Captivate, they have technology where you can flight a campaign and you can just program it in yourself. So it kind of really depends at this point.
All right. For folks who, like I said, this platform's a little bit newer, so right, it's not there for everybody. You can't just run up there, put your podcast on there, and start getting bids from folks. But for folks who are thinking about this kind of cross promotion strategy for growing their show, what advice could you give them, either as the podcaster who wants to accept promos or the one who is kind of pitching promos to other shows? What are some best practices or things to definitely avoid?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in terms of pitching your show to be sold, I would say really think about whether it's the best thing for your show or for your audience, because like any kind of advertising, whether it be another show or a brand, there has to be a good payoff, right? It has to be worth the work to kind of put that out there, and you have to ensure that your audience isn't going to be alienated by it either. I've talked to so many people with a show with, I don't know, maybe 10,000 listens, and that's great. Okay, 10,000 listens is a huge show per episode, but if you want to put a mid roll in that show. It's 10 minutes long, it's probably not going to be worth the money that you're going to get, because the CPMs is so low, and you want to concentrate on making sure that the whole show is worth listening to, because you want to grow that. So really think about whether your audience would accept something on your show before you actually commit to something. Don't get too ahead of yourself. Allow yourself time to develop an idea, to develop a show, to develop a format, because try and run your own race. I know it's quite a generalized saying, but there's so many different types of what is even a podcast, right? It's just a mechanism of delivery rather than a thing. And I think a lot of people get caught up in, wanting to be something, when actually a show that reaches 10 people could be just as successful as a show that reaches 10 million people, but you're defined by your parameters in terms of success. So those 10 people could be the most important people for the message that you're trying to convey. So that's one thing to say about that side. And then in terms of people wanting to get their promo on other shows, I think my personal opinion is that just do your research in terms of the audience, because even if it's just a cross promotion email into the ether and you don't know them, you're still taking time out, you're still doing the work, you're still putting your name out there, and you want to get it absolutely right. And don't underestimate the cost, both the real cost, but also its cost in other things like time it takes to kind of make a trailer, ensure that that it hits home, because it's time consuming. Podcasting is time consuming, and you want to make sure that you're really focused. So when you're thinking about your audience, the type of promo that you produce is important, the research, but kind of don't just limit yourself to the podcast world. Open it up, look into other areas, message boards, that kind of thing. If you're doing a show about a certain topic, I'm sure there are websites and there are other kind of platforms that you can promote your show on, because ultimately you want to make it as broad as possible, and you never know that people. I mean, there are so many stats about who listens to podcasts and the room for it to grow, right? So you want to make sure that your time is precious. Make it worth it.
Good advice. I want to go back to something that you said a few moments ago about whether or not your audience will accept advertising, will accept promotional content. And what I often would tell clients in the past was, if you even think that you're going to do advertising on your show, if that is going to be part of your monetization strategy, get your audience used to that break as quickly as you can. Even if you are just creating promotional messages for yourself, maybe you're just talking about an event you have coming up, your email list, right? Like, start to create the idea of a break in your show now, so that when it happens later and it's not for you, it's a lot less jarring than someone who's used to having a show completely ad free. And now all of a sudden it's, you have ads now, which it's fine. Shows should be allowed to have ads. I know there are lots of listeners who get annoyed by that, but it does, soften the blow a little bit if you've kind of built that expectation in.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it's so funny you say that, because there's so much, especially, I don't know if it's a British thing, it could be a global thing. I don't know. But in terms of talking and it's a British expression, taking the piss out of podcasting in general, right? There's so many kind of memes and stuff about, you might listen to, I don't know, who was the other one I talked to the other day? Somebody said something about Mark Maron, right? Great podcast, but maybe the podcast only really starts until 20 minutes in, because there's so many ads and there's so many kind of like corporate reads, and people find you can skip it and stuff. But I don't know, it's anyone who has experience in podcasting or social media or anything that's free, your general punter doesn't care. It's like, well, it still annoys me. I don't care if I don't pay for it, and I still understand that that adverts get you money to do the thing that I'm listening to, but it still annoys me. Right? It's generally not a logical thing. It's more of an emotional thing. So putting a marker in where there could be an ad, I absolutely agree, because it's just kind of priming somebody for going, okay, maybe even if it's subconsciously, there's going to be a break here. There's going to be some kind of messaging. And there's obviously then a discussion about the type of advert, whether it's a programmatic radio style ad with a voice you don't know, or it's the kind of a host read or sponsorship. That's a different kind of conversation. And as long as that's, segregated correctly, I guess. But people still want their stuff as kind of ad free and as free as possible, even though it's a contradictory term phrase. And sometimes it's not always possible.
Yeah, they just want it their way. Well, if you're curious to check out how the platform works, maybe you want to advertise, promote your show on one of the shows that are being listed here, check out podcross.co. We've been chatting with David McGuire, the director of Stable and Adelicious, and the brains behind podcross.co. Before we let you go, a couple of questions. In general, is there a place where you would like to see improvement in the podcasting world in general? It doesn't have to be advertising, but just something that really rubs you the wrong way that you'd love to see corrected.
That's a really good question. And I have a silly one, which I'm not being uber serious, but it kind of annoys me a little bit in a fun way. and that's when people call podcasts pods. It happens quite a bit in the UK, which is such a silly thing, and I'm kind of it's one of those things where I catch myself. I'm like, don't be such an idiot. But because I've been working in podcasting, and you get people who want to make it kind of a bit. There's a bit of a laddie culture sometimes, where, especially, I'm going down a rabbit hole now, but if they want to be familiar, and so they call it pods. Hey, do you want to come on my pod?
Pod. Yeah.
Get a pod, and it's like, it's it's, I don't mind it too much, but just if you work in podcasting, you're like, no, it's a podcast anyway, and that's a whole nother thing. But what would I change? That's a really good question, and I'll think of the right answer in about 5 hours, probably when I'm lying in bed. But the one thing I really loved about podcasting at the start was how genuinely lovely it was to work in podcasting. Without exception, it's an industry that is open to most things. Most people want to lift each other up. Most people enjoy other people's success. There's lots of collaboration, and there was lots of freedom, because it wasn't the open RSS feed was such a magical thing. It was like blogging in the early days. And it was generally, I mean, I'm sure, hopefully you agree, it was especially, in the mid-teens, 2015. We sound like a history teacher. It was genuinely an exciting place to be, right? Because only a handful of people really knew what it was, and let alone, how to do everything across the spectrum of it. And what I want is for podcasting to retain that, because what I'm seeing, and this might be my cynical old man way of looking at things 10 years later, is I see that generally year on year eroding slightly, bit by bit. And it's the classic example of money follows money, and you've got the big guys coming into the space and you've got suddenly debates about open RSS versus a walled garden of content and all that kind of stuff. And, where people get content, and even people are using the word content instead of show. And, but my wish is for that kind of collaboration, that niceness, and genuine wanting to help each other to remain in podcasting, because I think if it loses that, it loses its essence of what excited me in the first place.
I do agree. It was always the most pleasant experience was being around other podcasters, and as anything grows, the niceties are always going to be eroded just a little bit. So in a similar vein but slightly different, is there any technology on your wish list? Is there a piece of equipment, a kind of software, something that either you is out there that you want to buy, or something out there that you'd love someone to create for podcasting?
So in terms of technology, it really fascinates me, because it's not my area of expertise. Quite honestly, I can barely open a laptop without it collapsing. But this whole AI thing, and there's a company. Oh, what's it called? It's
there's Cast Magic.
It's like Wizard. Oh, it kind of. Somebody sent me a show. It was a Swedish soccer show, and I listened to it, and it was about an hour and a half long, and I thought, it's okay, but it was two English presenters, but they said it's completely AI. It's completely produced, translated by AI, and it even though it wasn't my thing, it blew me away. It'd be really interesting to see how AI develops podcasting in that sense. I already know that a lot of news websites have daily podcasts now automatically produced from text, or even just from news outlets that just kind of collaborate together.
Yeah, I've seen some technology where they will read you articles via AI. Also, I mean, it's prolific on YouTube to have videos that are just reading comments in a computer generated voice, right? And like just totally automated content. But it's a strategy that works for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, and it's time saving, right? And that's always going to win if you can solve a solution. Solve a problem with a solution that doesn't take any manpower, then you're probably onto a winner. But in terms of technology that I look at and I like, um, this is so great. But this microphone that I'm using right now, I wanted one for ages in terms of just a decent microphone, and a Focusrite and a cloud lifter, and that I was over the moon with that. But yeah, this is really annoying because I'm going to think of something in about
As soon as you
3
hang
hours
up, right?
time. Yeah, I'm going to go, oh yeah, I should have said that. But again, with podcasting, it's a fascinating world. Like if you read the news of in podcasting, there's always an innovation. There's always something new going on. Somebody's trying to solve a problem, and technology is definitely a big part of that. There's things coming out every day, which is why I love it.
And the last one, which I think is also, you're going to be mad at me that I didn't prep you with this one. What is your favorite podcast that you're listening to right now? So what is that show that no matter what you're doing, when this one pops up in your feed, it is going to be listened to like that day or as soon as possible?
Yeah, this is more in my wheelhouse, more the content side. But there's. Can I have a couple?
Sure.
There's a history comedy show called Oh What a Time, which is 3 British comedians who take a subject like escapes or I don't know, innovation or fashion, and each of them bring a different period to the table, and basically they try and decide whether it's the past was worth living or whether it was just a horrible place. They have a proper historian researching all the different topics, and it's relatively new. I think it's probably about 6 months old, but I love it because I love as with most podcasts, it's about if you like the hosts, you kind of probably like the show. And I love history too, and I love comedy, so it's perfect for me. I always listen to that. And sorry, just on as an aside, the one thing that they do quite well, I think, is that they release each episode into 2 different episodes, if that makes sense. They split it from one day, and then the next day will be the next half. And they do that because they have a subscription where you can have another day, but you can only do it if you subscribe. So I think they're quite clever with that. And another one, which is an American one I listen to with Guy Raz, which is How I Built This. And yeah, I just really like him. I think he's a really good journalist. And as someone running my own businesses, I just like hearing the stories, and it's really easy to listen to, no matter what the industry they're talking about. I'm always fascinated about people going through the quote unquote journey, and I think the production's really great. But that's, they're 2 very different shows. One is just I suppose a panel show, and the other is a nicely sound designed storytelling show from is it NPR? I might be wandering now, but NPR stock. How about yourself? I'm keen to know.
Oh yeah, I listen to Start Here every day from ABC News, so they're they do like a nice mix of news stories to start the day off, right? Having worked in the news business, I can't stop. And I find this to be better than the daily, just because I want more than one topic. Like I don't want to just be an expert on one thing. I want to know a little bit about everything going on. And then I've been on this crazy binging of Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. I'm very late to that party, but I went back and I started from the beginning, and I've been listening to it for months now, and I'm close to being caught up. So those are the 2 I'm prioritizing right now, but I got a road trip coming up, so I'm going to need some new ones. So that's why I love this question, because I get good good suggestions from other people.
I could bore you today. I used to Stable, my production company, used to be a podcast recommendation newsletter in 2015. No, probably earlier than that, 2014. And so it's one of those things that I love talking about, because there's so much great stuff out there, and you're never going to be able to listen to anything. But a long car journey is a great excuse.
Well, if you have more suggestions or more answers to the questions that you think of later you want to shoot over, we'll include those in the show notes. Along with, we'll include a link to podcross.co and to David's other company, Stable. It's wearestable.com. We've had the pleasure of chatting with David McGuire, the director of Stable and Adelicious and the brains behind Podcross. David, good luck with that platform. Keep up the great work, and thanks for joining me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Matthew. Just one thing, if I may. If anyone listening has any feedback, I'm completely open to that, because this is for podcasters. And if I'm missing a trick, or I'm not, it doesn't do something that they want, please get in contact, because it's for them ultimately.
So I believe there's a contact form on the website, but if you're okay if we pop your email on the show notes as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So we will also make sure to include it. It's going to be David at wearestable.com. But again, we'll make sure to include that link in the show notes. David McGuire, great to meet you. Thanks for joining me.
Absolute pleasure.